Chronic fatigue syndrome, dealing with it. Hello, my name's Rob Davis. I made my very first video on this subject just a while back, and honestly it wasn't the greatest thing I've done. Why? Because I still have a lot to learn about making videos, and they're quite complicated. So there won't be great graphics or music, instead just a simple narrative of my story. Also, I'm not a doctor, so this is for education purposes only. But there's the rub, you see. As Shakespeare put it, because you can't rely on your doctor either. Why? Because they often don't have the answers for you. If there's one thing I'd like to impress upon you with this video, is that you have to take responsibility for your own health. Rely on the so-called experts and you'll get absolutely nowhere. A recent bit of data showed that in the UK, 1 out of 4 diagnoses is wrong. This means that 25 people out of 100 get the wrong treatment completely. Some people call their illness their journey, but for me, this is a bit of a euphemism, because for many of us, it's a complete and utter nightmare most times, consisting of great pain, physical and emotional, major depression and even bouts of suicidal thoughts. These symptoms can go on for months and years. So is there a cure? You know, I see stories on YouTube about individuals who have experienced full recovery after a few sessions of therapy. I'm happy for them, really. But they tell us how wonderful their life is. But I wonder if they really have had chronic fatigue. I still have symptoms 35 years on, but I've learned some very useful things. But then again, perhaps there are degrees of severity. Perhaps it's down to what caused their illness. Maybe it's down to individuals' own immune systems. All I can tell you is what happened to me and what has worked for me over the last 30 years. You know, some of us can recall the exact time we started with ME, or CFS as it's now called. It was the winter of 1983-84. I'd been married to Jane for 3 years. I was completely and utterly happy, running my own business. Then I had a viral infection. I was feverish and had a splitting headache, a temperature that soon turned into a chest infection. My doctor prescribed antibiotics. These were administered like sweeties in the 1980s. 2 weeks later, I was still the same and given another course of antibiotics. Nowadays, we have learned the folly of giving these things for viruses and how important one's gut flora is in maintaining the immune system. I always wonder if I'd got better without those antibiotics, but sadly, I'll never know the answer to that, and maybe you won't too. My first point is about the damage that viruses can do to your body. Interestingly, we see that many who recover from the COVID-19 virus also end up with chronic fatigue symptoms. Their MRI scans show inflammation to the brain. My research tells me that when the hypothalamus and the pituitary glands, these are 2 small glands in the brain that regulate the immune system, when these are damaged from intense fevers, then your whole hormonal system can be thrown out of balance. This may be temporary, it may be permanent. That's why it's imperative to have your hormonal system checked out. And sadly, in the UK, the system is not very good at doing these things, especially for men. Don't get me wrong, our NHS can be marvellous. Right now, doctors and nurses are putting their lives on the line for the COVID crisis. But the GP service, with its 5-minute consultations, can be utterly useless at getting to the bottom of CF. Viruses also attack the adrenal glands. These are small but important glands that sit on top of your kidneys. They produce, amongst other hormones, cortisol. Now, cortisol controls the immune system, your blood pressure and your zest for life. Here again, the NHS fails to check cortisol levels, and even when it doesn't do that properly. So there I was, so ill, so weak and feverish that I hadn't the strength to make a cup of tea. Have you been like that? Going to work for a whole day was out of the question. Now, the odd thing about CF is as time goes by, some days you can feel almost normal and get on with your life. Has it gone? Only to find that you're back to being ill for the next week or more, or months. This is just one of the frustrations of living with chronic fatigue. And this alone has wrecked careers and broken up marriages. Anyway, months went by, I couldn't work and I thought my life would come to an end. Fortunately, I have a wonderful supportive wife and family, but what were we going to do with our lives? I was 30, Jane was 24. We talked things over and concluded that I should sell the business, that possibly Jane and I could do something together, part-time perhaps, enter the Lady magazine. Now, the Lady magazine has several pages of jobs catering for the rich and the famous. Nannies, cleaners, cooks, housekeepers and handymen, that kind of a thing. Maybe Jane and I could do something like that together. We applied for the role of housekeeper and handyman at a country house in Shropshire. This was no more than 30 miles from where we lived, near Birmingham. However, when we rolled up for the interview, we were shocked to go up a long drive to arrive at a huge stately home. See the picture. This was the home of Lord and Lady Forrester. Lady Forrester interviewed us and we got the job. It was about as perfect a fit as possible. Part-time, 4 hours each. I thought I could manage that. Jane's job was the most responsible as she worked on food preparation for the family. And actually, she became an excellent cook. Whereas all I had to do was potter around the rooms and do the dusting. I could do that. A huge flat went with the job and the views across the lakes and the woods were utterly beautiful. It was a place to rest. Now, I won't go into any more detail about our life working at a stately home, unless viewers are interested, but it was fascinating to say the least. Jane and I are both from working class backgrounds and city dwellers at that, so it was quite amazing to work for the upper classes with their pheasant shoots and parties. I managed my work just, but I was still ill, and like many other people, I kept going to doctors to get the same old questions, the same old blood tests, and get the same old answers. Mr. Davies, I'm afraid the tests have all come back negative, and we can't find anything wrong with you. Have you had that? So then you start to go and see the alternative practitioners, the herbalists, the naturopaths, the homeopaths, the whole list. Pay out a fortune and get absolutely nowhere. 7 years went by, and I didn't even have a name for this thing, this complete and utter nightmare. And then Jane spotted a small paragraph in a local newspaper with the heading, ME. I read the symptoms. It described my illness to a T. Brain fog, feverish, constant flu-like symptoms, weakness, and oddly enough, couldn't cope with sugar or alcohol. If I ate anything with sugar in it, I would get angry and irritable. Alcohol would make me very ill for 4 or 5 days. But at least now I had a name, and there were more people like me. Was there light at the end of the ghastly tunnel? Learning how the body's hormonal system shed light on some of these difficulties. I'm going to deal with hormones in the next video. Thanks for watching, and God bless.